Hey guys, it is Crypto Indio here, and I have actually a very special guest with me. His name is Jonathan Nelson. He was a former advisor to the SEC, and he is also the managing director of Hack Fund. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. We're going to have a fun conversation. I want to find out a little bit about you, but also I want to ask some serious questions because we do have impending regulation upon us, and it
Yes.
would be nice to speak with somebody who's actually worked closely with the SEC and that kind of has an idea and can kind of help us navigate what the heck is going on or what's going to happen with crypto. Kind of just a little bit important, right?
Yes, I believe that crypto is the universe's way of teaching like geek securities laws. Um, I believe the universe is trying to tell nerds something, and that it's you really should learn up a little bit about securities laws before you actually start issuing tokens. So yes, no, huge important question.
Okay, so before we get started and I ask you the burning questions, let's find out. I want to know who you are. What is your professional background?
I am a strange child. I was raised in Central America, the only white kid at the end of 6 hours of dirt road. Swear to God, I
Like
was
my
peed off.
daughter. Like my daughter. My daughter is probably the only white Hispanic girl in our neighborhood.
Oh my gosh! So I was actually peed on by a howler monkey in Central America, and then I came to the States. Dad talked me out of majoring in computer science back in 1990 because video games don't want you playing video games, son.
Right.
And so he suggested I major as a nurse. So I was a trauma nurse for about 20 years. I went back to school for software engineering, moved to Silicon Valley, was working on startups and started these events called Hackers and Founders. And those events went viral globally. And I have been working on how do we actually help startups around the globe get investment and receive investments to help their startups.
Okay.
Because I've literally had conversations with tens of thousands of tech entrepreneurs from around the globe. And the biggest pain in the ass is how do I raise money to actually do my thing? Which led me into crowdfunding, which led me to geek out on securities laws, which led me to write 80 pages of comments to the SEC on crowdfunding reform, which got me nominated by one of the SEC commissioners to this advisory committee on capital formation. And I was like, okay, do I have to wear pants or can I wear shorts? They're like, no, you have to wear shorts, preferably a suit. So I'm like, crap. So I had a suit made and I went to DC a couple of times a year for a few years and kind of did a deep dive on securities law, securities regulation, and the problems with raising money in Silicon Valley and around the world in the United States. So I'm a software engineer. I have written a smart contract. I've worn a suit. I have been at the SEC. I served on an advisory committee. They're not that bad. And I'm now trying to change how we actually invest in companies around the world using crypto and blockchain and digital stock certificates and STOs.
Awesome. That is actually a really cool story. That's a really inspiring for me because I started off in healthcare. So
All right.
I did healthcare 7 years as I'm a licensed pharmacy technician, but
Oh,
I didn't like it because
yeah.
I worked in infectious disease for 7 years and really
No.
just coordinated patient care. And I love my patients or my old clients. I still actually talk to some of them, but it just
Yep.
really wasn't. It's you don't really get raises and whatnot, and there's not a
No.
lot of freedom in healthcare to kind of. I mean, of course, you get to help people, but I can help people this way too, as well.
Yeah. No, and if you're really good as a nurse, as a pharmacy tech, you might get like a pat on the back.
Yeah.
Um, and if you really suck, you don't get the pat on the back, but you still get paid the same.
Yeah.
So when you want to be good at something, when you want to excel, healthcare, it's great because for helping people, but to actually the whole financial end of things, the reward versus work thing doesn't really connect. So finance startups, yeah, that's kind of my jam now. So I completely get it.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome though because it's really inspiring to see people that are able to actually change completely different careers and go ahead and make do well for themselves and actually find happiness and peace doing something else. So
Absolutely.
that's inspiring for other people too because I was scared initially. I was scared when I took that jump, but
Yeah.
it's starting to work out well. I'm still new, but I love what I do and I'm happy and all kinds of fun stuff gets to come out of it. I get to talk to cool people like you and it's awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The people in this space are really cool, a little crazy and a little twisted, which is just fine for me.
Right.
So
They're up our alley. So, when did you get into crypto and why did you get into crypto?
So I got into crypto because, well, I had a little mining rig back in 2012, 2013, because I was so far ahead of the curve and I didn't see the point, and so I deleted all my tokens. Um, and then I was looking a lot at how do we solve this problem of liquidity in startups, like how Silicon Valley invests in companies is I buy stock in your startup,
Mhm.
but the only time I make money is when I can sell that stock again, like when Google buys you, and then I can sell my stock to Google, or when you IPO, and then I can sell my stock on the NASDAQ. But those are the only two ways that people make money investing into startups. And 80% of the world's startups that get acquired in Silicon Valley. So this is where like almost all of the money worldwide for venture capital gets invested. And I'm like, this sucks because there's amazing entrepreneurs all over the globe that I'm talking to. How do we come up with a new system to actually invest in them? So I just started doing a deep dive on securities law. I thought I could actually build a fund that was publicly traded. I can indeed do that. In the US, it would take $3 to $5 million to actually launch a fund like that, where the investors in the fund could buy, sell, and trade the stock, and they wouldn't have to wait for a decade or more for the startup to exit.
Gosh.
And then I started looking at crypto, and people were like, dude, blockchain. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be a regulatory shit show, man. It's going to be just awful. But I looked at it, and you know what? I actually think that the killer app for blockchain is issuing a digital security. These things are just built tokens are built to be securities. And in fact, almost all of them are securities as per the SEC. But how do we handle the compliance and legal and the requirements and that sort of stuff and bake that in so we can actually not go to jail,
Right.
and do what we do? So that's kind of what I'm doing is the legal and regulatory technology surrounding issuing digital securities and still complying with the law. And you know what? It's not terribly hard. It's just finicky.
Well, and also too, you do have to research and you do have to go through these laws, and you kind of do need to figure out what's being said. Some of this legal jargon, some of this legal terms that they use. I do have a little bit of contract experience,
Yep.
and it's very hard to pick through these really old. The way they're worded is extremely old, and the words they use are not really. We don't really, because we don't talk like that. I don't talk the way I'm talking to you now. I don't talk to you in contracts. So to be able to understand all that, it can be very complex for just an average person.
No, absolutely. And the thing that drove me crazy, like I was on this SEC committee, and I'm like, I'm an okay smart guy, and if it takes me an hour to read one page, I've learned that it's not me; it's the writer who is crap.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, there's certain standards that they need to have, but at the same time too, it's not really they're written for attorneys to understand and people that deal with them every single day. And the average person like myself, or maybe you, or whomever, my husband or my mom or whatever, if we're going through and we're reading this, it's really not gonna make sense, and it should be worded. Maybe they can have like a light paper and a white paper, how we do in crypto, and have
yep.
like an official SEC paper, and then something like a light paper that makes more sense. But you know.
No, absolutely. And there's actually rules on the books that the regulations need to be written in plain English, but those are ignored.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, that drives me crazy. And when I suggested it, the lawyers were like, well, why would we want normal people to read these things?
Well.
And I'm like, because I don't want to pay you $1,000 an hour. They're like, well.
Scoffing at you.
But yeah, no, it's the plain English stuff. Is putting these rules in plain English, and once you do, it's actually not that complicated.
Right.
It's a pain in the ass to be able to read the legal code. And I actually think of legal code. If I go into it thinking that I'm going to read an interesting book, I'm screwed. But if I actually think of it as I'm understanding the computer code of how to make a government run, mm-hmm. and to how to make an economy work, then I'm willing to spend a bit more time noodling over like pages of legal code, because it's like computer code. It makes a machine work. The machine is the machine of government and not the machine of a processor, but it's still the same kind of concepts.
So let me go ahead and ask you this. Do you think STOs are going to replace ICOs in the upcoming years?
I think they have to, or people are going to go to jail.
Okay, so STOs are the new thing, and ICOs are going to go away, and everything is going to be a security then.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, at least in the United States, and this legal regulation is weird because, if a person in Finland issues a token at an exchange in Malta that a person in China buys, which laws did they break?
Right. Yeah,
You
that is.
know?
Yeah.
And so being US based, and I think everybody kind of around the world looks at the US and says, "Ooh, well, let's see what they do." The US has probably some of the strictest securities laws in the world, but it's also, the $50 trillion a year industry.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a huge giant machine that runs well, but the machine is going to automatically reject things that are kind of challenging it. There's this inertia to kind of keep things the same way. So part of that inertia is that the Supreme Court defined what a security was in 1948. They said that this Orange Grove, that J.W. Howie, this Orange Grove deal, he was going to buy Orange Grove back and then re-rent it back to people, and they were going to receive money and this and that and the other thing. It was kind of like this quasi Ponzi scheme. The
Sounds.
SEC came after him and they said, "Dude, that's a security." He's like, "No, it's an Orange Grove," and they said, "No, it's a security," and the SEC said, "No, dude, it's a security," and they defined what a security is, and that's the law of the land, and the SEC has to interpret that land. So the core thing is if you make a thing and people buy it thinking that they're going to make a profit from your thing,
Okay.
then it's a security.
Okay, that's actually I appreciate you explaining it like that because that makes sense to me. That's awesome.
And so it doesn't matter if it's an Orange Grove, if it's
Tangible,
you
not
know
tangible. If you can buy something and then resell it and make money, it's a security.
if they're going to profit and make money from your work,
Okay.
then that's a security. And so it's based on their anticipation of profit in what you do. So they get profits from your work. That's a security. That deal, that whatever it is a security. So, like, everybody's pitching these ICOs saying, "Oh, it's this utility and all this awesome stuff is going to actually happen and this and that and the other thing, and it's going to go in value because we have these awesome economics and this and that and the other thing." And the SEC is like, "Yeah, that's a security because people are anticipating profits from your work." And they're like, "No, no, no, it's this utility thing. It's an API key, but it's going to increase in value." And like the SEC is like, "No, I'm sorry, dude. Your thing is a security."
Right.
And the entire industry has just kind of, been shocked at that. But at the same time, do you really want to go to jail? I mean, the SEC have friends with the FBI, and the FBI has friends with guns. And so the easiest thing to do is actually not sell to the poorest 94% of the U.S. population, not sell to us poor bastards who are the blower 94, and only sell to rich people in the United States, i.e. accredited investors. After that, most other countries aren't nearly as anal retentive about securities laws as the United States are.
Right. Well, let me ask you this then. So if a
Yes.
company, if a coin company or a token company decides to not do an STO or not do an ICO, are they still would they still be considered classified as a security? Does that keep them safe?
So no, if you launch a token, a thing, and if people are going to buy it because they anticipate profits from your work, then that's a security. If I say it's a utility, I'm sorry, what you say doesn't matter. It's what the SEC says, and they're going to look, did people anticipate to profit from this purchase?
Okay, so even if they don't have an ICO, they can still classify it as a security.
Correct.
Okay.
If you actually sell it to unaccredited investors, it's still a security.
Okay, that makes sense and that clarifies things because I was under the assumption that if you do not have an ICO, that your project is safe.
And so, I mean, if people are going to buy, sell, and trade these things, then, if it's going to be on an exchange, chances are it's probably going to be a security, which is why a lot of the Chinese exchanges are just starting to block U.S. people from being on them because they don't want to run afoul of the SEC, but they don't really care that much about like the Europeans and the Latin Americans and that sort of stuff
Okay,
because those
that
countries
makes
aren't
sense.
as anal.
That
Yep.
makes sense then. Okay, so let's get into some questions from the Twitter community. I ran a poll, and you want to know what the most popular question was?
What's that?
When moon.
When moon, when Mars is in conjunction with Venus in the lower third of the sky and the singularity is approaching and the Dogecoin flippening happens when Dogecoin takes over the world, then moon.
Okay. All right. So you guys, that was the answer to the most popular question. Let's get into some real questions though. Okay. I took three questions that I thought were the most appropriate for this interview. So the first one is they asked, how does he anticipate utility based initial coin offerings will be regulated? So how do you anticipate ICOs? How will they be regulated?
If you're going to sell them to the poorest 94% of the people in the United States, if you're going to sell it in the United States, that's as a security, which means you can only sell it to rich people in the U.S. unless you do financial reporting and disclosures to the SEC.
Okay, so would those disclosures would that be like doing something under Reg D or Reg A or Regulation CW?
Yeah, there's three important categories. One is Reg CF, where you have to have a reviewed financials of your project, and then you can raise up to $1 million. Reg A plus is you have to have an audited financial, and then the SEC has to approve it, and then you can raise up to $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you file an S1 statement and then file quarterly financial reforms, then you can raise whatever you want, but it takes about 1,000 hours of work to fill out that S1 statement, and it's usually lawyers that do the filling out, and they charge you about $1,000 an hour.
Okay.
So Reg CF up to $1 million, Reg A plus up to 50, and then public are really your options, or private to only rich people.
Okay, so right now there's really not a lot. Like for let's say I'm a poor person because I am not a super rich person. I'm not rich at all. If I want to come up with a project and I want to raise money for it, I really at the end of the day, I'm really going to have to hire like a team of lawyers to help me legally do all this stuff.
So you have reviewed financials, you fill out some paperwork. There's actually websites that will kind of walk you through the process, but it's probably going to cost you $25K to actually raise $1 million. I hate to say it. It's just that's the way it is. You're going to have to find that first $25K from rich people or friends and family who put some money in.
Okay, so it's just like essentially it's like starting a small business because I know I was looking into buying like a donut shop or a bar or whatever. I wanted to quit my job and have my own business. So I started going to like the SCORE meetings and I was like, okay, well I can just have this really cool business plan because I know how to write papers. I know how to do all kinds of stuff. They taught me all kinds of cool things in college. But really, you have a business plan and you go to the bank and you try to get a loan. No one's giving you a loan.
Correct. And that exactly is the problem that I have seen tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times around the globe is you have amazing entrepreneurial people, but to get the initial capital to do the thing, we just don't have good mechanisms to do that. So the vast majority, I believe is like 81%. I just was talking with a guy this morning, 81% of small businesses don't have access to any kind of outside financing.
Right. Yeah, it's very, very, very tough. My husband, he quit his job and started his own business. But when the construction industry, it's a little bit different because you have wholesale houses and stuff that do work with you because they understand the struggle. And you're able to take loans from them and do all this really, really awesome, cool stuff. So that does help. But at the same time, too, it's really not, it's hard.
Yeah. No, it's impossible. So the vast majority of people use credit cards, which suck.
Yeah, those are high interest rates.
And so, no, I mean, I've maxed out credit cards and defaulted on them once or twice in my life, just because trying to do entrepreneurial stuff.
It's hard. Yeah. Okay. Next question. What is your stance on tokenized securities versus tokenized assets? And will non-sophisticated investors be allowed to access these investments? Also, do they see an issue with foreign ownership of land when tokenized?
So I believe that it's so painfully obvious to me as a software engineer, the fact that I can represent a share in a company with a bit of software, or that I can represent partial ownership of a piece of property or land or a car with a bit of software. It's just obvious to me that this is going to be the way that all financial assets are bought and sold in the future. It's just duh. It's going to take 10 to 20 years for that to happen. But the trick is, how do we automate a lot of the compliance that actually happens? And that's what's actually happening now, is there's a ton of companies automating things like anti-money laundering checks, know your customer sort of stuff, automating, are they accredited or not? And so I think after those automated compliance tools are built, I think it's just going to become very normal for people to be able to purchase real estate or part of a piece of real estate from another country. There's also a lot of regulatory arbitrage to be done, i.e., let me find a legal jurisdiction that's friendly with this stuff, and then let me not make it available for sale in like the US, where the legal jurisdictions for this sort of stuff are really uptight and really compulsive, really anal retentive. So yes, it is going to happen. It's just going to take a bit of time. Hack Fund, we're actually going to be listing on a public stock market. So we're going to have part of the stock of Hack Fund listed on the stock market, and part of it is going to be listed on crypto exchanges. Nice. So you're going to have one foot in both worlds like that for a while, until all the compliance is automated and people just start to trust that these tokens are in fact asset-backed securities.
Okay, fair enough. All right, last question. When is the SEC ICO, and when can Americans get in?
I believe they actually already created their website. It was about 4 or 5 months ago, wasn't it? And they created kind of this mock scam website of this is kind of the hype. No, if the government is for the people, by the people, of the people, I actually think that we should tokenize the SEC. We should have an SEC token or something like that. And weirdly enough, you can participate. You kind of got to nerd out a little bit. Like, you can go to their website and you can actually write comments on stuff that they actually look for. And by law, they actually have to read it.
I actually watched, it was a YouTuber, I forgot what video or who it was, but they were talking about like ETFs or whatever. There was an option for average people like you and myself or whomever to go in there and leave comments about why they should approve ETFs, and people were just putting really ridiculous stuff, and I was like, oh my god.
No, but you can, and if you're thoughtful,
they might look at it and consider it.
Yeah, and if you can read it, but if you put in the work, you can actually comment and you can actually participate. And by law, and they actually read the stuff.
That's cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, and there's the people who are making the regs. Like, part of the deal is they have to read all of those comments, and they kind of have to respond internally to those comments. So the problem is that a lot of the people that actually comment on these things are like really expensive lawyers. And they have a vested interest in making it really expensive to access capital so that the really expensive lawyers continue to actually, have more work. And so if you put in comments like, dude, I can't read this, can you please put this in plain English so like a muggle like me can understand? They like that. They take that stuff seriously.
Oh, nice. So, I'm going to start going in there like every day and being like, please put this in English I can understand, because it's complicated. It's hard.
Yeah, no. So if, for instance, there were listeners that were passionate about trying to change securities laws in the United States, I also think that we need something like, we need to repeal or reform the accredited investor definition.
Yes.
I.e., make it easier for the poorest 94 to be able to learn, maybe pass a test or something, and then let them invest in these things.
That would be, that's actually a really good idea, because if you're literate enough to pass a test and understand the information and understand the risk, why not? Why shouldn't you be able to? If you want to take, money and go ahead and invest it in whatever you like, we should be able to. You're allowed to gamble, you're allowed to buy cigarettes, you're allowed to buy alcohol. We're now allowed to buy marijuana. So it's like, why can't we take that money and do what we want with it? We're allowed to buy houses and all kinds of fun things that are legal here in America. So.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to buy McDonald's too, and that's probably not such a good choice.
No, I mean, so one of the questions that I asked is, they were saying, well, non-accredited investors, well, we need to protect them, and, they're going to lose all their money. And there truly are a lot of shitty people who are scammers in the financial services industry. And so you do need rules to constrain bad people. But like I had nurses who were asking me, dude, can I invest with you? And I'm like, no. They're like, why? Because you're not rich enough to make a smart investment decision. Like, that's a terrible thing to say. I'm like, that's the law.
Right.
You know? And so having been a nurse, like I'm very much one of the big reasons that I'm actually doing all of this pain in the ass work is because my dream is to have nurses be able to invest $20 or $30 a month into a fund that invests in 300 tech companies.
Nice. Well, it would be like investing in like a 401k or an IRA or something too. It's just a different type of investing.
Yeah. And they're like, no, we can't they're not smart enough to make these decisions. I'm like, dude, do you know how large the lottery is? They're like, what? It's like a $60-80 billion a year industry.
Right. And people are, yeah, you're right. People are allowed to do scratchers and all kinds of stuff. And generally those are really targeted to the lowest of the 94% because they're at liquor stores, and liquor stores are always placed in those areas, which makes sense because that's their target audience and it's all part of marketing and whatnot, but it's the truth.
Yeah, but could you imagine actually just being able to go into a liquor store and being able to, for instance, buy a token that's like the When Moon, scratch off card, and if you scratch it off, you actually get to participate in an ICO or something like that?
That's cool. That's a cool concept.
Right, like that's really, these are government sponsored lotteries. The only reason that lotteries are not defined as a security is because they're government run.
Interesting.
But they don't let us, participate because, and this is one of the reasons that keeps the rich rich and the poor poor, is we can't actually participate in these types of deals so that we can make our money work for us. Like one of the shockingest things for me as I've been kind of going from being a nurse to being like a fund manager is that when you're rich, people come to you all the time giving you opportunities to make more money. Like people come to you and say, hey, let me pitch you this business idea. Let me pitch you this. Let me pitch you that. I get like 10 people a day pitching me on LinkedIn because I have managing director of Hack Fund on my LinkedIn profile. And you know what? When I was a nurse, like fucking no one came up to me and said, hey, do you want to make more money?
Yeah, nobody cares. Like, oh, you work in healthcare, so you just get stuck. And even that also goes to with this as well as when I was working at my old job, the kind of promotions that were available to pharmacy technicians or the nurses were like, oh, well, you can do something at like admin stuff in healthcare, but if you had like, let's say you were already a managing director of another part, let's say like marketing or finance, there's always more opportunities to, that you would be considered as. And let me tell you, some of the people that I worked with, I was like,
Yeah. No, but, I was serving on an SEC committee, advising the government on capital formation before I could actually invest in private companies legally.
Right. Well, you put your work in and you put your time in, so.
But I should be able to take a test and be able to say, you know what, I want to take a flyer on, a crypto.
Right.
Without that crypto having to, do financials. I feel pretty strongly about that. And honestly, I think if that were changed, I think a lot of this drama around crypto tokens versus securities would just go away. I think what people are really upset about is that they can't crowdfund the way they think it needs to be crowdfunded, the way we believe that crowdfunding works.
Right.
So write the comments on the SEC that we need to reform the accredited investor definition.
Okay, one quick question. Well, this might not be so quick, but one quick question. This is important to me and I'm curious about. Well, there's two questions, but I'm going to have you on another time and I'll ask this question. But as far I know I know the deadline is coming for the ETF approval. Do you think what do you think is going to happen?
You know what? I actually feel eventually they're going to get it, and eventually I think they're going to have to approve an ETF. I've heard rumors that the latest SEC commissioner that just got voted in, there's 5 of them usually. When I was there, they only had 3, and 2 of them were Democrats, 1 of them was Republican. 3 of the 5 now are Republican, and they tend to be more laissez-faire, kind of like hands-off about this sort of stuff. So I believe that eventually an ETF will get approved. It's just a matter of time. You're seeing large institutional players like Goldman start to get into the space. Fidelity is getting into the space. Coinbase has its institutional product. I heard rumors that Andreessen Horowitz's crypto fund actually sold out like 5 or 6x.
Oh, wow.
like many more people wanted into that fund. And so I think that there's enough demand from the richest 96, the richest six, that they're going to end up approving these things so that the rest of the world can kind of start investing in this stuff.
All right.
It's just a matter of time.
I agree too. I'm all for government takes a lot of time to do things. They move very slow. I like
Yep.
to use a DMV analogy. When you go to the DMV, you're there for like plan to be there all day. I think it will get approved. I do think it's just a matter of time. I know everybody in the community is like, oh, it's going to happen now. It's going to happen now. I'm like, no, just be patient. Like it's going to happen, but don't expect, give it some time. So,
Yeah, and shockingly, it's really only been 2 years since like this whole ICO stuff has actually
right.
happened, since we've had smart contracts that have been public. And so I'm actually shocked at how nuanced and quick an approach the SEC has actually taken. You would normally expect the government to sit on something for like 5 to 10 years before they actually take action.
Okay, so we're actually on good. We're doing well with time then.
I'm shocked that yes, the government has moved quickly on this, and I have also been shocked at how nuanced. Like Commissioner Clayton actually issued statements saying, "Hey, ICOs can be a great way for people to raise money. There's a risk of fraud. If you're going to invest, here are 14 things that you should ask."
Nice.
Like,
That's
I'm
cool.
like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And so they're open to this idea. They just want to be sure that their worst nightmare is that a little old lady loses all of her dinner money or all of her cat food money. And so as long as we can protect the little cats, grandma's cats, I think
Right.
we'll be fine.
Right. Okay.
So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to plug any of your company or anything that you do? Do you want to plug that before we go?
Sure. If you want to go to hackfund.com and kind of learn about how we're trying to change venture investing and make it more equitable. If you're in the poorest 94% in the United States, I'm sorry, you're screwed. You can't invest. But if you're not, you can, and follow us, tweet us. I am El Gringo on Twitter. Jonathan Nelson on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. And no, just power to the people, man.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate your time. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Linda. You too.